Brothers and sisters, your brother G World 7_D. Here's a book, This Torrent of Indians, War on the Southern Frontier, 1715 to 1728. Now, as I read this, I want you to pick up on certain things, alright? I'm going to read you a few paragraphs, but I want you to pick up on certain things, alright? Let me get it clear. The Catawba spoke Siouan. They resided in 7 towns about 150 miles northwest of Charlestown. That was named after King Charles II. And I showed you how King Charles and King Charles II look like. Okay. On the North Carolina border, near present-day Fort Mill. The Catawba's total fighting strength was approximately 570 warriors. Several independent towns of Siouan-speaking Indians were located to the north and northeast of Charlestown. Their towns could call on nearly 600 warriors. They included Cape Fears, Sharas, Congarees, Petties, if I'm mispronouncing that, my bad, Santees, Seawees, Wakamas, Waterees, Waxhaws. The Appalachians, I keep telling you these names are very similar, alright? The Appalachians reside in 4 towns, which may have been consolidated to some extent. Their towns were on the east bank of the upper Savannah River, between present-day North Augusta and Beech Island. They spoke Muskogean. The Appalachians were a former Spanish ally who had resided in several mission towns in northwestern Florida during Queen Anne's War. Large raiding parties of South Carolinians, Yamasees, and Creeks devastated their mission towns. It killed the adult men of the towns that mustered a strong defense and sold their women and children into slavery. The Appalachians, who surrendered, were marched to the upper Savannah River, where they built towns and guarded the entrance to South Carolina's northwestern frontier. Many of the Appalachians willingly migrated to the upper Savannah River, probably to escape the labor draft, enforce cultural changes and other mandates of the Spanish mission system. In early 1715, the 4 towns could field about 275 fighting men. The Savannahs were 3 small towns of Shawnee Indians who spoke Algonquin. Their towns may have been consolidated. They have resided on or near the site of present-day Augusta, Georgia, since about 1681, but many of them had recently migrated to other areas. Only about 67 warriors and their families remain. The Uchis is a group that included several towns scattered over southeast. The Uchi language was unrelated to any other language of that area. 2 of their towns were on the west bank of the Savannah River, about 15 miles northwest of present-day Augusta, near Uchi Creek in Columbia County, Georgia. Okay, Uchi Geechee, come on. These 2 towns, which may have been consolidated, could field about 130 warriors. The Chickasaw maintained 6 towns in northern present-day Mississippi. The language was Muskogean. They had about 700 warriors who had a reputation of being ferocious. They held sway over parts of present-day Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Tennessee. Most Chickasaws were enemies of the French and their allies, the Choctaws. The Creeks clustered their towns into 2 major groups, the Lower Creek and the Upper Creek. During the late 17th century, several towns of the Muskogean-speaking Indians and towns of allied people of other linguistic affiliation were living near the Chattahoochee River on the present-day Georgia-Alabama border. Other towns were near the Alabama-Coosa and the Tallapoosa River in south-central Alabama. You got to understand how these things are similar. About the year 1691, Spanish soldiers burned some major Chattahoochee River towns as punishment for the townspeople refusing to stop dealing with South Carolina traders and their failure to welcome Christian missionaries. Those Indians moved their towns northeastward to the area of the Ochese Creek, now known as the Oconomowoc River, in present-day Butts County, Georgia. Other Chattahoochee River towns were moved further eastward to the Oconee and Savannah rivers. South Carolinians began referring to all those migrant people as Ochese Creeks. Their migration proved profitable for South Carolina's traders. The people of those towns became important customers. The new locations made the traders' overland trip from Charlestown considerably shorter, and boats could deliver heavy and bulky goods via the inland passage. The Altamaha River and the Cochise Creek. By 1712, those people under Ocheese Creek, Oconee River, and the Savannah River had formed a loose confederation and were often known by South Carolinians as Lower Creeks. In early 1715, the Lower Creeks had 10 towns and could field about 731 fighting men. They didn't need to import those slaves here. They got the people here. All right, they didn't need to go somewhere else. The people were here. Lower Creeks developed a political alliance with Upper Creeks, who were in present-day central Alabama. The Upper Creeks were loosely divided into three groups: Alabama, Abaca, Tallapoosa. The four towns were near the confluence of Alabama, Coosa, and Tallapoosa rivers. The Abacas, and the Tallapooska, maintained approximately 28 towns on the Coosa and the Tallapoosa rivers. The Upper Creeks had approximately 1,352 warriors. Yamasees were most closely associated with the South Carolina, both commercially and militarily. Then the other groups. Some of their towns had been in the southwestern part of the colony for 30 years. They were two separate groups, the Yamasee and the Gael, or the Guli. The Gael, the latter of which they pronounced as Wali. Both groups probably spoke Muskogean. The Yamasee and the Gael people resided in several segregated towns. The Wali, the identity and location of their towns were often in flux, and sorting out the changes is often a puzzle. They often moved towns from one location to another, and they were occasionally consolidated with other towns. Sometimes people withdrew from one town and joined another, and at other times they dropped old names and adopted new ones. Previously, during the 16th and 17th century, the Gael towns were in the Spanish Mission province of Gael, along the coast of the present-day Georgia. Many Gaels became Catholic Christians and adopted Spanish names. They were under the protection and supervision of the Spanish colonial government of Florida, which maintained small detachments of soldiers near the missions. The relationship with the Spanish was sometimes turbulent. During the late 17th century, the Gaels began suffering from slave raids from the Westo Indians. The Westos, also known as the I'm gonna mispronounce this, the rich Crayons, if I pronounce, sorry for the mispronunciation with that one, had previously lived to the north near Lake Erie. In 1656, the Iroquois defeated them, forcing them to flee south to Virginia, with the encouragement of Virginia traders, who armed with their muskets. The Westos raided Gaels and other Indian towns in southeastern North America. They captured women and children and bartered them to the traders who sold them as slaves. Pirates also began raiding the Gael mission towns. By 1684, it became obvious to some Gaels that the Spanish could not adequately protect them. More importantly, the Spanish refused to supply them with adequate firearms for self-defense. I mean, this is the Gullah, okay? This is the Gullah people. The Gaels also had grievances. Spaniards drafted Indians as laborers to work in the mission cornfields and as soldiers for the Indian militia. The Gaels were encouraged to adjust their culture to comport with Spanish standards. The Spanish sometimes meddled in the political affairs of the Indian towns and occasionally punished the people of towns for misdeeds of a few warriors. Westo's gunmen also raided the Yamasee towns that were in central and eastern portions of present-day Georgia. By 1622, the people of several Yamasee towns moved southeast to the vicinity of present-day Savannah, Georgia. Not long afterwards, the Westos raiders again attacked. Many Yamasees then moved south and settled near the Gael missions under the protection of small Spanish garrisons. The Spaniards regarded most of the Yamasees as pagan, although a few became Christians. The Westos Indians were finally defeated and driven away by South Carolina with the aid of Savannah or Shawnee Indians during 1680 to 1681. However, pirates continued to prey on the Gael and the Yamasee towns along present-day Georgia coast. During 1683 and 85, many Yamasee and Gales fled north to South Carolina. They established two major towns, present-day Beaufort County, then commonly known as Port Royal. The Altamaha was settled on Port Royal Island in the Pocatello on St. Helena Island. During 1685, Yamasee were a party armed with British firearms received from Scottish traders at nearby Stewartstown, raided a Spanish Timucua Indian mission west of St. Augustine. I showed you the Timucua Indians, how they look like before, okay? These are all Negroes. The Yamasee killed 18 people and captured 25 women and children, brought them back to Port Royal, and traded them to the Scots, who sold them as slaves. The Spanish retaliated by conducting two raids. They killed and captured several Yamasee and burned Stewartstown. The Yamasee quickly sought safety from future Spanish attacks. They moved inland to northeast and reestablished the towns on more defensible sites in the vicinity of the Ashepo and the Combahee River. The 30-year period of mutual hostility between the Yamasee and the Spanish began. After about a decade, the Yamasee began moving to more permanent town sites on the mainland, northwest of Port Royal. They were probably encouraged to move by the establishment of the new South Carolina Decalpins near the Ashepo and the Combahee rivers. South Carolinians began referring to all the inhabitants of the Yamasees and Gale towns as Yamasees, perhaps not realizing that they were two distinct groups. However, the ethnic distinction between the Yamasee and the Gales may have started to blur. Considerable interaction between the towns of the two groups probably occurred, to include visitations between friends, courtships, and marriage. I'm going to stop there, man. I'm going to stop there. I could read on, but I'm going to stop there for time purposes. But the main thing that I was getting at is the fact is that I mentioned, you heard what I mentioned about King Charles, Charlestown, and I showed you the image of King Charles. Those Negro black Moors of Europe was coming over here, but those Indians, like I showed you, the Gale or Lagole people who are already over here, that's the Gullah, all right? And I said, Okamuchi, Ogeechee, Yuchi, those are the Geechee, the Gullah Geechee. You have the Gale, the Gale, and the Ogeechee River, the Yuchi Indians. That's your so-called Gullah Geechee. All right, these people are not African. These are indigenous Aboriginal black people. I just read that to you. And many of them were taken as slaves. And then when many group was basically decimated, they killed off some of the men, and they had the women and children left. They raided them as slaves. Then some groups who will survive formed with other groups and came together and formed another group of nation, a group of people. And what you call a confederacy together to protect themselves, like-minded individuals. This was happening in America. You didn't have to go to no damn Africa to bring people over here. The farmland, with people who are already here, who know the land better, who are accustomed to the land, who've been growing the crops here. Why would you get foreigners to do that when you had the Aboriginal people here who knew it better and who lived here for thousands of years? Black America is not descendant of African slaves. They're descendant of Aboriginal blacks that were already here and mixed in with some black Europeans who came here. We're not African. And this needs to be really welded into Umar Johnson's head and the rest of these stupid Pan-Africans. They're very ignorant because now they want to deny so-called black presence here before Columbus. This is the ignorance that we have in our community. And your argument for reparations will be stronger if you don't call yourself a descendant of slaves. All this other crazy stuff. You are a descendant of the Aboriginal blacks, some of them who were made into slaves. And some of them were bartered off. I read that fast because I want to get all that information in, because I don't want my time to end too. But brothers and sisters, I'm letting you know this information. This information's there. When people tell you they don't care about the Olmecs, or we don't care about the black Europeans, or we should just study Africa, we have our history in Africa, that is a basically informant. That is a person who's not in your best interest. That is a person who's basically being controlled by outside interests, and they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Because you cannot talk about a history, and also, you cannot talk about a history if you don't include the black Europeans who came over here. You cannot ignore that. You cannot ignore the Aboriginal blacks that were already here and them black Europeans. I showed you a picture of King Charles. I showed you it before. King Charles of Spain, Austria. And then King Charles II. I showed you his picture. Charlestown, I believe it was, like I said, named after his son, Charlestown. King Charles. It was named after a Negro. Let me repeat this again. It was named after a European Negro. So the fake white paintings that they show you are BS. Some of our conditions that we in today, you have some sellout Negroes here and sellout Negroes abroad that came here. So we're going to have to understand that fully. So I don't want to hear another African person or some Caribbean person telling so-called black Americans that we're African. No, we're not. And I just read you the so-called locations of those Aboriginal blacks, and those names are very similar. Okani, Muskogee, these goddamn names, Tallahassee, Tallapoosa. These names are so damn similar because these were the same goddamn people. The same Negro black people who were the Southeast. Most black Americans are descendants of those Southeast black Indians. Not no goddamn Africans. And it's not no self-hate. This is learning our true history. Learning who we really are. We were not brought here in no chains by no white folks. We were already here. It made no sense to get a bunch of people somewhere else. We already had them here who knew the damn land. This is getting really sick and ignorant. The information's there. All you gotta do the research. But half these dumb Negroes don't want to do nothing. They take face value what these white folks give them. Which is sick. Peace and love, brothers and sisters. This is your brother G World.